I know I've told this story before, but I just love the ingenuity of this mom, so I have to share it again. A super smart mom commented on one of my TikTok videos about kid podcasts, and she says she uses kid podcasts in a way that I hadn't ever thought of before. She uses them to ease bedtime separation anxiety. She listens to an episode or two with her kids as they're falling asleep, and then she leaves but lets the episodes keep playing. Genius, right? This podcast that I'm talking about today is the perfect kid podcast to do this with. It's called Sleep Tight, Relax. I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I'm a mom who has used podcasts to fight the boredom and loneliness of motherhood, and now I want to help you find a podcast that can do the same thing for you. It can be overwhelming to try and find a podcast you'll enjoy in the thousands of shows that are out there. That's where I come in. My episodes are short and they answer all of the questions you'll have about the podcast, so you'll know if it's a good fit for you or not. I'm here to help you find a podcast you'll love without wasting your time. Now, let's talk podcasts. Cheryl and Clark, the husband and wife team behind the show, describe the show like this. Sleep Tight, Relax is a bedtime show for the young and young at heart. Every week, we help you and your children prepare to drift calmly off to sleep by listening to our mix of dream-inducing bedtime stories, relaxation techniques, calming nature sounds, and soothing music. Created for kids, but appropriate for all ages. Sleep Tight, Relax makes bedtime quality time by helping busy minds become calm, focused, and relaxed. Some episodes are 20 minutes long, and other episodes are about 2.5 hours long, with the first 5 or so minutes being a short story and the rest being a soundscape your kids can listen to while they fall asleep. Before we learn more about the vibe of Sleep Tight, Relax, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my guide to kid podcasts. One of my favorite parenting tools is kid podcasts. I use them when I'm running errands with the kiddos to keep them from complaining the whole time, or when I need a mom break, I'll just grab an easy activity like coloring pages or a sensory bin, turn on a kid podcast, and the kids will be entertained for at least half an hour. I know that kid podcasts would help you in your life too, which is why I made a guide to kid podcasts. There are 8 categories ranging from science to mindfulness to audio drama, with at least 3 episodes in each category. There are 27 podcasts in total on the guide. I've listened to each of the podcasts, so I can attest to them being kid-friendly. And I put my email at the bottom of the guide so that if you try a couple with your kids and none of them are a good fit, you can email me and I will personally help you find a kid podcast that works for your littles and you. You can grab this guide at the link in the show notes. Now we get to hear from Clark as he describes the vibe of the show in a way that might get him in trouble with Cheryl. And keep listening after the interview for a short clip of the show. Clark, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Before we dive into your podcast, can you introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Clark, and I write and produce a number of podcasts for children, including Sleep Tight Stories, Sleep Tight Science, and the one we're talking about today, Sleep Tight Relax. And I do this full-time from a small studio in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, on the east coast of Canada.
Oh my goodness. I have always wanted to go to Prince Edward Island, so you are living my dream right now.
Well, it's a wonderful place in the summertime, maybe not so great in the winter, but
that's true. Okay, so I'll definitely have to visit in the summer when it's warm. I'll have to make a note of that. So, what made you want to start Sleep Tight, Relax?
Well, my wife does all the voiceover, all the storytelling, and she has been teaching elementary school for many years. And she always used stories in her practice. So she loves telling stories. And in my previous career, I enjoyed stories and producing stories as well in different ways than her. And we started a different podcast, Sleep Tight Stories, for that reason. But when COVID, I think this was primarily a COVID project when we were all locked down together and we had a little bit more time together. So we started doing more. The audience for Sleep Tight Relax is a little bit older or a little bit more mature in terms of their ability to handle longer episodes.
Mm-hmm.
We did a lot of, in my past life, I did research into children's certain their behaviors and habits, and we found that the length of the episodes for Sleep Tight Relax tends to suit uh, slightly older children in terms of, and yeah, I mean, we have lofty goals. Of course, we want to help kids become healthier and happier, and help parents with sort of as an adjunct or as an addition to their existing bedtime routines, and help. We've helped some kids because we have a mixture of stories and sort of mindfulness methods to help kids become more mindful. And of course, we have some relaxation, very basic relaxation techniques. And from the feedback that we get, that seems to help some children with anxiety, help them have a good night's rest for the most part.
Definitely. And I can use all the help I can get with bedtime routines. So I'm grateful to you. So you've kind of talked about easing anxiety, helping with mindfulness. What is the main thing you want kids and their parents to get out of your podcast?
Well, we want to help parents. So the focus is on the kids, but really, if we can help their children look forward to and be able to settle down at bedtime to and have a good night's sleep, then I think it's mission accomplished.
Definitely. I completely agree.
For sleep tight stories, kids often say they need more than one story to fall asleep and they want more. But for sleep tight relax, because they're a little bit longer and we have a sort of a mixture of different types of things that we do, I think the ultimate goal is for them to fall asleep before our audio finishes. And then I think that makes the parents happy as well as the kids.
Definitely. So I feel like this is an easy question because of the nature of your podcast, but I still like to ask, how would you describe the vibe of your show?
Podcast is very the listening to a podcast relies very much on the person speaking their voice. So I tried in the beginning to do some voiceover, and I don't think it worked so well. So I would compare it to listening to. I'll be in trouble for this because we're not of the grandparents' age, but maybe listening to your auntie tell you a story at night. So the vibe is very relaxed, not mellow, not boring, but very relaxed. So oftentimes the sort of a contrast between what we do and other children's podcasts is I compare others to Saturday morning cartoons, the voiceover to be like Saturday morning cartoons. They're very up and very exciting. Whereas I don't think we can be exciting. That's not in our not really in our nature, whether we wanted to or not. So I'd say we're very, just like the title, we're relaxed, calm.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to ask you what your favorite episode is, but to give you a second to think about that, first, can you tell me where can people find you?
You can find Sleep Tight Relax wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can go to our website at sleeptightrelax.com.
Then I will point people to your website, and obviously you can listen on the podcast app you're listening to this episode on. So, favorite episode or a couple of episodes, because I do know that it's hard to choose just one.
I don't necessarily have a favorite, but I would say what I like the most is perhaps what we're producing most recently. So I have started to write more original stories for Sleep Tight Relax. And so one which will release this week is called Flippy the Walrus. I think that's the working title, Flippy the Walrus. And so that is a very short story. And at the end of the story, we will have the soundtrack will continue for a couple hours so that helping the child go to sleep. And that would be my favorite.
Love it. Truly, you are not the only podcaster that says that. Sometimes I think it's just the nature of podcasters in general, I've decided, because maybe creatives in general, we're just the most excited about whatever we're doing right now because that's what we're thinking about and that's what we've been working on. So that makes sense. And I cannot wait to listen to it with my kids and point my listeners to it because it sounds fabulous. So earlier you were talking about this podcast being for a slightly older audience than your other podcast, Sleep Tight Stories. What age range would you say is like perfect for this podcast? Obviously younger and older will listen, but like what's the like target audience?
I would say upper elementary school, middle school. Still very young, but in some of our other podcasts, they tend to be started kindergarten. I think kindergarten is probably a little too young.
Okay.
Simply because they wouldn't have the attention spans, and we do stories like Dr. Doolittle.
Sure.
That might be too much for that age.
That makes sense. Okay, well, perfect. That's all I need to know. Especially I give a lot of recommendations on social media. And so I like to, for like my own personal like help, I like to know if someone says, hey, I've got a 5th grader who needs help going to sleep. I'll be like, oh, I have the perfect podcast for you. So it's also just for my own research so that I can give good recommendations when I'm giving recommendations. So thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And I cannot wait to introduce my listeners and their kids to Sleep Tight Relax.
Well, thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure to meet you and your audience.
Before I let you go, I'm going to do something a little bit different because Clark isn't the one that voices the episodes, and a big part of the podcast is Cheryl's soothing voice. I'm adding a short clip of an actual episode to help you know what it sounds like. Here's a clip from the episode titled The Happy Prince.
Hello, I'm Cheryl, and this is Sleep Tight Relax, a calming bedtime podcast for the young and young at heart. It's time to get cozy in bed and listen to tonight's story. Our sleep story tonight is The Happy Prince. In a city, a swallow stops to rest as he journeys to Egypt to meet up with his friends. He rests at the statue of the Happy Prince. But when he feels drops, he wonders how he can protect himself from the rain. When the sparrow looks up, he notices that it is not actually rain, but the prince is crying at the sad things he can see. The prince asks the swallow to help him. Before we continue with our story, let's take a moment to relax. We can practice our deep breathing anytime or anywhere. But before bed, let's first turn down the lights, get comfortable, and make sure that everything feels as it should.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you know someone or a family who could use Sleep Tight Relax in their life, will you share this episode with them? Also, if you want to learn about more kid podcasts, grab my kid podcast guide. Talk to you soon.